So I just finally finished playing The Evil Within, and a lot of people I know personally were asking if they should play it too, if it's worth their time. This isn't an easy one for me to answer. You see, there's a lot of things in the game that I really liked. But the problem is there's a ton of agitating issues strewn throughout the game that make the things that work not shine as brightly as they should. My aim when setting out to make this video was to take a look at the game in all of its individual parts and examine what was done right and what was done wrong. A sort of post-mortem examination rather than a review. So in roughly chronological order, here are my observations. Kicking off this review is going to be, appropriately, the start of the game. The opening sets up a great tone, gritty, noir-styled horror. Sebastian Castellanos, a burned-out veteran, a new partner, and a trainee, called into a crime scene, a seemingly operational mental hospital, surrounded by rumors.
Some patients disappeared. Some kind of scandal?
Now the site of multiple grisly murders. A single doctor remains as the survivor of the apparent massacre.
Can't be real.
In an instant, Sebastian is captured, and things will never be the same again. It's really well done. There's tense foot chases, sneaking sections, and they all lead to creative scene transitions and creeping feelings of unease. I freaking loved it! All that tone and general feel, creepiness and atmosphere, all set up great. All of it set up to be destroyed cause then this cutscene plays. Yes, Shinji, Inception was a good movie. And I know that you have a boner for destroying the settings at which your games take place. But action and destruction, especially of this scale, have their place. That place is not in the beginning of your so-called reimagining of the survival horror genre. This is the stuff we see at the end of the second act of a cheesy disaster movie out of the 90s. I should also mention that this is where we're very quickly introduced to our cast of cardboard cutouts that will follow us and weigh us down throughout the course of the game as support characters. First off, we have ambiguously foreign Doctor Guy.
I'm a doctor, Marcelo Jimenez.
He clearly knows more than he's letting on. He has a prior relationship with both Ruvik and this strange patient of ambiguous importance. Next up, we have Mr. MacGuffin, aka Leslie.
Were you warning me about this? You were Leslie, right?
He has some sort of connection to Ruvik as well that will be explained later on. He also seems to have some sort of lucid control over the nightmare world that everyone seems to be trapped in. After him, we have Boob Lady.
Junior Detective Kidman. Any thoughts?
Nothing yet. I'm sure we'll know everything once we get there.
She's there to be the twofer, pulling double duty as both the rookie and the token female character. Again, she clearly knows more about everything that's going on. Then there's Sebastian's Bishonen boyfriend.
Joseph, you think there's a connection?
It's a possibility. I believe the records were sealed.
He's the stereotypical, by-the-books partner, and the stylish support character. Just look at those gloves! He reminds me a lot of Otacon from Metal Gear Solid. They're both completely useless in combat, you need to rescue them constantly, and they're both dating the main character.
My darling, I can't get enough of your love, babe.
And then finally we have Redshirt McAlready dead. He dies in this cutscene. RIP. Now see, a problem I have is rather than meeting each of these characters individually and having them develop over maybe the course of a chapter in which they'll be introduced, they throw them all at you at once in the hopes that if they overload you with characters, their lack of proper development and motivation will go unnoticed. What's sad is that the bits of the story that the characters are given are pretty intriguing. Anyway, after we finish that scene, we're finally brought out of the prologue. Chapter 2 opens up with Sebastian waking up in what appears to be the very institute we just watched sorta, sink into oblivion. But now it's all intact and taking place on the set of a 50s horror anthology show. And by that I mean it's got a black and white filter on it. Are you scared yet? We're greeted by a robotic-sounding nurse who informs us that we've been here a long time, and that it's now time for us to save the... It is now time for us to sign the consent form to start our procedure. This is where we're introduced to a mechanic that will remain with us for the rest of the game. We have RPG elements! In all seriousness, this is a really cool thing that they added, and it's not something entirely new. We saw this mechanic show up in Resident Evil 4 with the merchant who sold weapon and storage space upgrades. It's just been more fleshed out here. True to form, however, like the rest of the game, you'll see they found a way to fuck it up. While there's nothing inherently wrong with having an upgrade system or RPG elements in your game, this is supposed to be a psychological and survival horror game. Survival horror is at its strongest when the player is instilled with a sense of disempowerment. Keep the player in the position of the underdog. That's how you make a scary game. This can be done well if there was a semblance of difficulty curve in the game, but it's so damn inconsistent and wonky you'll end up overpowered like a beast in one chapter and completely fucking useless in another. But I'll talk more about that later. Anyway, after your transition back into reality, which, by the way, is a very cool transition, Sebastian finds himself in a spooky forest, where we get introduced to most of the main gameplay. It plays like every Resident Evil game post-Resident Evil 4. Which is to say, it's passable. Gunplay works fine, and to its credit, is appropriately frantic, especially in close quarters. This brings me to another new inclusion in the gameplay, however. Stealth. You can sneak up behind and ambush unaware enemies, killing them instantly, most of the time. Again, it's a mechanic that can be done well, and has been done well in many survival horror games previous to it. And it can even be expanded in a game like this with RPG elements. But the problem is, none of the abilities that you can unlock are stealth related in any way. The stealth mechanic is completely limited to specific scenarios, and it doesn't have any room for experimentation. The game basically only allows you to be stealthy when it wants you to be stealthy. Meaning the sections where you sneak never feel organic, and always leave me with that forced stealth section aftertaste. Even through all that, I'm still a fan of how, even in open areas of Chapter 2, it still managed to keep a claustrophobic and creepy feel. It limited your visibility, it kept it dark, there were lots of blind corners, it left you to rely on listening for enemies and keeping their track in your head, so that when you decided to sneak by them, you wouldn't have to have a fight on your hands with your limited ammo. It was good, and much like most of the first chapter, it lent itself well to the survival horror theme that the game was clearly trying to go for. Then Chapter 3 happens, and it takes that gameplay you just took that whole chapter to learn, and takes a big old shit on it. After you finally catch up with ambiguously foreign doctor guy, he lets you know that Mr. MacGuffin has escaped to the other side of town, which is currently infested with barbed wire zombies. He basically tells you that there's no way to get through without taking them out first.
The gate open. You're the one with the gun.
If you say so.
So wait, you're telling me that I have to fight my way through this rundown village with my pistol, a shotgun I find, and my wits against a horde of inhabitants who are being controlled by some strange entropic force that compels them to attack me. And the whole scene culminates in a boss fight against some buff dude wielding a chainsaw and wearing a sack on his head? Cool. Now see, it's during this fight that the camera, a camera clearly set up to give a claustrophobic feeling, was not made for massive fight sequences. Because of how close the camera is to you, it obscures your view pretty significantly and becomes a giant frustration because you'll take hits that you don't find fair out of a place that you could not have seen coming. Oh, but Ron, I thought you said the feeling of claustrophobia and tension was a good thing. Can you not keep a consistent opinion? Are you just a hater? Are you a hater who hates this game and wants to hate it for every little thing? Well, yes, but listen to me. In the slower sections dominated by stealth, small enemy encounters, and ambushes, the close angles work well. They lend themselves well to horror. It keeps you from seeing where the scares are coming from. But fighting 30 baddies at a time while dealing with those close angles combined with the letterboxing and post-processing motion blur made it feel like I was being punched in the head while watching one of those old-timey peep show projectors they have set up in saloons. Another downright insulting thing about this sequence is that it's not a standalone case. This exact sequence gets repeated several times over the course of the game. They just slap one of these fights down at the end of a chapter instead of a clever puzzle or a real boss fight. There is no excuse for it, especially since when the few boss fights that occur happen, they work really well. The bosses are well designed. And actually on that note, let's take a break from spewing bile, at least for a minute, and talk about the bosses. Throughout the game, there are several boss enemies that pursue you through their various levels, and you have to fight most of them at one point or another. Now, while these boss fights don't do anything new mechanically, they're still really fun. The monster designs are interesting and animated very, very well. They all have this janky, uncanny valley style movement to them that make you uneasy just by looking at them. Creature Laura especially was incredibly well done. Her movements are super creepy, she flips around everywhere, her attacks are really unnerving. It's great. One creature you fight that I was really pleasantly surprised with was the Keeper. Considering this guy is all over the game's marketing, it's good to see that effort was actually put into making this guy an absolute joy to fight. I really wish there were more sequences that included him. The only thing that differentiates the Keeper from the other run-of-the-mill fights in the game is that the Keeper is an enemy that inherently understands what its own abilities are. You see, during its fights, you'll notice that the safes, much like the fashionable one that adorns his head, are scattered throughout the environment. When enough damage is done to him, he'll die, and the safe on his head will burst open and break. And then just when you think you have a moment to gather yourself and continue on, one of the safes that you noticed on the ground will start to shake and float upward, the body of the Keeper forming underneath it as it rises. It's so cool. And it's really great too, because most of the parts that involve the Keeper have some sort of time-sensitive puzzle or obstacle course style layout to them, meaning that you can't just kill him and move on. You have to either actively avoid the Keeper and the traps laid out before you, or you'll have some objective that you have to complete quickly, like shutting off a poisonous gas valve. One of the first major encounters with him, for example, you need to shut him out of the room and lock the door. Soon, he notices that he can't get in with you and proceeds to rip his own head off to kill himself and respawn in the same room as you. It's so fucking cool. But alas, you can't have a game like this and only have two bosses. And sadly, the rest of the bosses in the game are where it falls flat on its big, dumb, tentacle-covered face. Part of the way through the game, we find ourselves in a rundown, partly flooded portion of the destroyed city. We see Boob Lady is stuck on a scaffolding outside of one of the taller buildings, having been chased there by zombies. To get to her, we have to cross the flooded streets. As we reach the water, though, we see a body fall into it, prompting this giant, balding mermaid shark with braces jump up and swallow the body whole. Fuck yeah! That's what I want. Giant, weird-looking enemies that have a distinct advantage over tiny, whiny Sebastian. I couldn't fucking wait to see how I would have to fight that thing. So I eagerly traversed the level, avoiding that beast's hungry maw, awaiting the climactic battle when the boss fight is actually, at the end, another identical fight against the same stupid horde of cannon fodder enemies. Instead of fighting the cool monster, we get its shitty leftovers. Another stupid battle against another stupid group of the same old cookie-cutter zombie dudes that we've fought so many times before. The only thing making it different or more difficult is that now the zombies have guns. And they wear stupid The Purge masks that make them immune to headshots. Fuck you, Mr. Enemy Designer Man. They came up with this grotesque and interesting monster that was clearly meant to be a boss, or at least fightable in some capacity, that use it twice and then they throw it in the garbage, never to be used again. Fuck you. Ah well, maybe we'll have better luck in the next chapter. Oh sweet! A giant blubber spider gun mech monster. Have I mentioned that the monster designs are pretty cool? How's this one gonna go down? Am I gonna have to like lure it in and like use its weakness? Oh, it's every turret section boss ever? Oh, it's just like the giant fight in Resident Evil 5? Okay, cool. Another boss that was built up the same way, it was made up to be entirely more badass than the fight ended up being, was the creature called Quell. It's a slimy squid snake monster that whips out and will bite at you and other creatures in the level leading up to its encounter. When you finally fight it, you realize it's pretty straightforward. 10 run, 20 shoot, 30 go to 10. Once enough damage has been dealt to it, however, it will run and jump up into one of the tubes above the arena that you fight it. To help you find it, the developers made it so that Quell will spit out these little slug monsters that you can follow back to the source. It's a good idea, but it leads to a bit of an imbalance. See, it's a good idea because it keeps the flow of the fight consistent. You don't have to stop the fight and search for Quell for minutes at a time to go and find it and start the fight over again. But the imbalance lies in this. Tell me if you can solve this equation. If the slug monsters take 1 pistol shot to kill, and they each drop 3 bullets, how the fuck is this even a boss fight? Especially at this late stage in the game. This is seriously embarrassing. I ended out this fight with more ammo and equipment than when I started. These bosses are so disappointingly easy, I was thinking I'd accidentally switch the game difficulty down a peg.
Fire.
Whoa, okay. Well, I wasn't expecting an overcorrection of this level. Jesus Christ! It went from being a walk in a giblet-filled park to a masochist sweat dream. Honestly, this fight alone took me an embarrassingly long time to complete. I got eaten, beaten, trampled, and unbirthed. Ugh. Tell me, Evil Within, do you know what a difficulty curve is? Because this is more like a difficulty brick wall. And the biggest joke, directly after this fight, it goes right back to Easy Street. Even the final boss isn't as hard as this mid-game fight. Actually, on the topic of the final boss and the final act as a whole, I just feel I need to mention this. So, most of the game, up until this point, has had some percent of subtlety. 1% counts, you guys. You'll hear a piece of dialogue hinting at something that you'll either encounter later on, an enemy's weak point, some secret item that you can find by sneaking around. It's pieces of cryptic information that help you solve a puzzle that'll appear later in the game. Now, before the end of the game, before the final assault on Ruvik's consciousness, you get one final piece of cryptic information.
Hey, damn it! Hey! I know you're out. Watch out for his eye.
What?
If you want to live, you avoid Ruvik's eye. Watch out for his eye.
What's that supposed to mean?
You'll see.
Ruvik's eye? What could that mean? Maybe it's some type of camera system, maybe he's got henchmen or creatures that'll bring on an alert status if they spot you. Nope! You start to walk through the next door, the walls become squishy flesh, and there's a giant eyeball staring at you at the end of the long corridor filled with traps. Seriously? All that build-up and this is the payoff? Subtlety? Go home. You're drunk. The biggest insult in this, the final chapter, is probably the finale boss fights. That's right, fights. It's literally boss rush mode. You go up against the Resident Evil 4 opening, again, followed by an attack with 2 keepers, and finally, a creature called the Amalgam Alpha. Holy Christ balls. This thing looks cool. I can't wait to see how okay, we all know how this bit ends. It's a turret section, followed by quick time events and a single fucking rocket. Ugh! Now, I will admit it doesn't reach Resident Evil 5's level of cheese with boulder punching QTEs on top of an active volcano, but like the little engine that could, they think they can. Now, after beating the final boss, one last twist is finally revealed. It was all a dream! No, seriously, that Inception comment I made earlier does more to explain the plot than the synopsis on the game's goddamn wiki page. Anyway, you rip Ruvik's brain out and stomp on it with the ferocity of Isaac Clarke at a rave. And then you wake up and find that you've been hooked up to the equivalent of the horror Matrix this entire time. You discover that, shocker, Boob Lady was in on it from the start.
It's ours.
Look, I get it. You're not just some rookie detective, and this is not just some ordinary kid.
She escapes with Leslie, not that the game outright tells you that.
Intrigue!
As Sebastian walks back into the real light of day.
Just give me some real fresh air.
Or is it? Yep, that ringing in his ears is supposed to make you wonder. Did Neo really make it out of the Matrix, or is Zion just another level of the Matrix? Because Shinji Mikami doesn't know how to let something just fucking end. So, how does The Evil Within hold up? Should I play it? Well, to answer the question that I've gotten so many times, yes. The Evil Within is worth your time. If you're able to get it for cheap, go for it. Because even past the cliches and tropes that this game finds itself falling into, you won't experience too many other things like it. I feel that even through all the problems that I had with it, I still enjoyed the time I spent. Don't go in expecting this to be a new revelation from the once master of survival horror, but more of a greatest hits compilation of the things he's done before. If you're a fan of Shinji Mikami and his work, and you go in without the expectation of being scared, I feel like you'll come out surprisingly satisfied.
Find myself within darkness twisting me.